The scary Maguad family home. This case is nothing short of a nightmare, a tragedy so shocking that it has etched itself into the annals of true crime in the Philippines. It's a story of unimaginable horror and loss, one that has left an entire community shaken to its core. As you delve into these chilling events, prepare yourself for a tale that is both heartbreaking and unsettling. It all began on the afternoon of December 10th, 2021 at precisely 2:58 p.m. Cruz Maguad, a 48-year-old public school teacher, was working at Warrion Elementary School. His wife, Lavella, the principal of the school, was away on an official trip. With the Christmas season fast approaching, Cruz had decided to lend a hand with some school repairs, hoping to wrap up tasks before the holiday break. Just as he was engrossed in his work, Cruz's phone rang unexpectedly. On the other end was a neighbor, his voice tinged with concern. The neighbor explained that while passing by the Maguad family home, he had noticed something unusual. The house looked as though it had been turned upside down, as if someone had ransacked it. Although the neighbor hadn't entered the house, he felt compelled to inform Cruz. A wave of unease washed over Cruz. Without wasting a moment, he called Lavella to share the alarming news and urged her to return home as soon as possible. Then, he left the school, his heart pounding with dread. At home that afternoon were the Maguad children, 18-year-old Gwen, lovingly called Gwen, 16-year-old Crizzle Lewis, nicknamed Boy Boy, and their recently adopted daughter, Janice Sibial. Strangely, none of them had called Cruz to report anything unusual. This silence only heightened his growing sense of fear. By the time Cruz reached their home at 3:15 p.m., the atmosphere around the house was eerie. The street was unusually quiet and an unsettling stillness surrounded the property. As Cruz approached the front door, his eyes caught sight of a bloodied blanket lying on the ground. Nearby, a knife glinted ominously in the afternoon light. Heart racing, Cruz called out to his children, their names echoing through the air. Boy Boy! Gwen! But no voices answered him. He tried the front door but found it locked. Desperate, he circled around to the back, searching for another way in. Once inside, the silence seemed heavier than ever, almost suffocating. Cruz moved quickly through the house, calling out again and again, his voice trembling with worry. When he reached the living room, he froze in his tracks. His worst fears had come to life. There, lying motionless on the floor, was his eldest daughter, Gwen. Her body was a heartbreaking sight. A blood-soaked towel covered her head, and her limbs and torso bore multiple deep slash wounds. The injuries on her neck were especially severe, leaving little doubt about the brutality of the attack. The scene was gruesome. Ants had already started to gather on her wounds, an indication of how long she had been there. Cruz could hardly believe what he was seeing, but there was no time to process the shock. He had to find his other children. Not far from Gwen's lifeless body, Cruz discovered his son, Boy Boy. The sight was equally horrifying. Boy Boy's hands and feet were tightly bound, and a gag covered his mouth. His young body was riddled with fresh stab wounds, a cruel testament to the unimaginable violence he had suffered. The once lively and joyful home had turned into a scene of unspeakable horror. As Cruz stood there, overwhelmed by grief and disbelief, he knew his family's life had been forever changed in a matter of moments. The sheer amount of blood inside the house suggested the horrifying attack had taken place not long before Cruz arrived. Despite the grim scene before him, one thought dominated his mind. One person was missing, Janice Sibial, the family's adopted daughter. His panic intensified as he searched every room, shouting her name. The silence that followed his calls made the situation even more unbearable. Just as Cruz was about to check the last room, Janice finally emerged. Her hair was... As investigators began to survey the house, it became clear that it was in complete disarray. Cabinets were open, their contents scattered across the floor, and personal items were thrown around in random piles. At first glance, the scene resembled the aftermath of a robbery. However, experienced investigators knew better than to jump to conclusions. A robbery was a plausible motive, but they needed evidence to back it up. Determining whether anything valuable had been taken became one of their priorities, but the brutal nature of the violence raised questions about whether robbery alone was the motive. In the meantime, following standard procedures, the police didn't immediately rule out Cruz and Lavella as persons of interest. Although Cruz had discovered the bodies and Lavella was away on a business trip, Their alibis needed to be verified. Investigators were thorough, examining Cruz's actions before arriving at the house and tracking Lavella's movements during her trip. At the same time, attention shifted to Janice, the sole survivor. She claimed to have remained in her room during the attack, a statement investigators had to scrutinize carefully. Janice's room appeared to have been ransacked, much like the rest of the house. Clothes and belongings were scattered across the bed and floor, but something about the disarray felt off. To the untrained eye, it seemed chaotic, but seasoned investigators noticed it lacked the telltale signs of a genuine robbery. The mess didn't appear consistent with a panicked search for valuables. This observation made the investigators more cautious, prompting them to examine the rest of the scene even more thoroughly for hidden clues that might explain the inconsistencies. As the search extended beyond the house, crucial pieces of evidence began to emerge. Just outside the front door, officers found a blood-stained short-sleeved shirt, which appeared to have been hastily discarded by the attacker during their escape. A few hundred meters away, in a nearby ditch, another disturbing discovery was made. Inside a plastic bag were bloody pants and underwear carelessly tossed as if the perpetrator was attempting to hide their tracks. These discoveries added another layer of complexity to an already horrifying crime scene. The scattered evidence hinted at a desperate and possibly rushed getaway, raising even more questions about what had truly transpired in the Maguad home. As investigators pieced together the evidence, they quickly realized that someone had deliberately tried to dispose of incriminating items. The discarded clothing and blood-stained tools suggested a calculated effort to cover the perpetrator's tracks. Inside the house, the scene grew even more disturbing. Near the front door, officers discovered a knife with a broken handle, its blade still coated in blood. Broken glass and shattered bottles were scattered across the living room floor, further underscoring the chaos of the attack. Pools of blood were spread throughout the home, giving investigators a grim sense of the violent struggle that had occurred. Among the scattered carnage, police found more potential murder weapons: a machete, a baseball bat, and a hammer. Each was stained with blood, leaving no doubt that they had been used during the killings. Crime scene experts carefully analyzed the blood patterns and the condition of the bodies to reconstruct the timeline of events. They concluded that Gwen, the elder sibling, was likely the first victim. Her blood had started to clot, and the early stages of rigor mortis were already setting in. In contrast, the blood around Lewis, her younger brother, appeared fresher. These clues led investigators to believe that Lewis had been killed shortly after Gwen. The state of the victims' bodies provided further evidence to support this theory. Lewis's hands and feet were tightly bound, and he appeared to have been restrained before his murder. In contrast, Gwen's body showed no signs of restraint, suggesting that she had been ambushed and killed quickly. This difference in how the siblings were treated added a new layer of complexity to the case. Investigators theorized that Lewis might have been tied up to prevent him from fighting back or escaping while the attackers carried out their brutal plan. The variety of weapons used in the murders raised serious questions for the investigative team: a broken knife, a machete, a baseball bat, and a hammer. All were found at the scene, each bearing signs of use. The distinct wounds on the victims indicated that multiple weapons had been employed. This led police to consider the possibility of more than one attacker. It seemed unlikely that a single individual could manage such a coordinated and savage attack, especially given the need to restrain Lewis while simultaneously using multiple weapons. Further supporting the theory of multiple perpetrators was the nature of Lewis's restraints. Binding a victim requires focus and control, and carrying out a violent murder at the same time would be a significant challenge for one person. Adding another layer to the mystery, Cruz, the father of the siblings, confirmed to investigators that all the weapons found at the crime scene belonged to the family. These were everyday household items, tools that were usually kept securely within the home. Their use in the crime suggested that the attackers had not brought their own weapons, but had instead relied on what was readily available. One detail stood out to investigators as particularly puzzling. The family's washing machine had recently been used, yet there were no freshly cleaned clothes anywhere in the house. This odd detail raised questions about the attackers' actions after the murders. Had they attempted to clean something, perhaps their own clothing or other evidence? The absence of clean laundry hinted at a possible effort to erase traces of the crime. This anomaly left investigators with more questions than answers, deepening the already baffling case. The discovery of the recently used washing machine, though perplexing, hinted at post-crime activity. It seemed likely that the perpetrators had tried to erase evidence or cover their tracks, but their exact motives remained unclear. This small detail, coupled with the sheer brutality of the crime, highlighted the urgency of the investigation. Local authorities wasted no time and quickly launched a manhunt to bring those responsible to justice. The horrifying nature of the crime not only shocked the small town, but also drew the attention of public officials who stepped in to accelerate the investigation and offer support to the grieving family. The community's outrage was matched by the determination of its leaders. Vice Mayor Joselito Penal of the Municipal Council of Malang, North Cotabato, announced a significant reward of 200,000 pesos for anyone who could provide information leading to the arrest of the suspects. Mayor Pepe Labangan of Tulanan added another 50,000 pesos to the bounty. These rewards underscored the seriousness of the case and the collective demand for justice. The people of the town rallied behind the Maguad family, desperate for answers and eager to see those responsible face the consequences of their heinous actions. As the investigation progressed, autopsies on Gwen and Lewis were conducted over 2 days, beginning on December 13, 2021. The findings revealed the extent of the unimaginable. Before the results of the autopsies were officially released, rumors began circulating online, fueled by speculation and gossip. Most disturbingly, some people pointed fingers at Janice, the adopted daughter and sole survivor. The community, already reeling from the tragedy, was quick to suspect her involvement without any concrete evidence. These accusations spread like wildfire on social media, creating a cloud of suspicion around Janice. The investigators, however, focused on gathering solid evidence to uncover the truth, determined not to let public speculation derail their work. If you've been following this story closely, you know just how shocking and heartbreaking the events surrounding Janice's actions have been. If you want to stay updated on this case, and many others like it, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an update. Like this video if you believe in the importance of justice and the need for change in the law. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so don't forget to leave a comment below. What do you think about the case, the legal system, and the way these events unfolded? Your support means a lot to us. Share this video with your friends and family so we can continue to raise awareness about these important issues. Together, we can help make sure justice is served. Thank you for being part of this community. Theories and accusations began swirling almost immediately, focusing heavily on Janice, her survival, the fact that the weapons used in the murders came from the family home, and the puzzling detail of the locked front door fueled suspicion. These doubts quickly escalated, with whispers turning into outright accusations on social media. Some people went as far as issuing threats against Janice, branding her as complicit without any solid proof. Under the mounting pressure, authorities decided it was necessary to question Janice directly to understand her side of the story. When questioned, Janice recounted the harrowing events of that day. According to her, she had been in a shared bedroom with Gwen, studying, while Lewis was downstairs in the living room. Suddenly, they heard Lewis screaming, followed by the sound of 3 men breaking into the house. Janice said she and Gwen rushed downstairs, only to witness the men attacking Lewis with the very weapons later found at the crime scene. Before she could react further, the attackers turned their attention to Gwen. Overcome with fear, Janice fled upstairs to the bedroom, locking the door behind her. She hid under the bed, terrified as the chaos unfolded below. Janice claimed that in her panic, she couldn't risk calling the police, fearing the intruders would hear her. Instead, she sent frantic messages to the family group chat and later directly to her adopted mother, Lavella. "Mom, help," one message read. Unfortunately, these cries for help went unnoticed. In desperation, Janice posted a plea on social media. "Help! Somebody has broken into the house. I don't want to die. I'm hiding in my room. Help!" However, fearing that the attackers might somehow discover her post and track her down, she quickly deleted it. She then tried to call her mother but received no response. Janice explained that someone eventually saw her deleted post and contacted her mother, prompting Lavella to call back. But by that time, Janice said she was too paralyzed by fear to answer. She changed her social media username to avoid being identified and silenced her phone. When the house eventually grew quiet, Janice mustered the courage to emerge from her hiding place. Still too frightened to go downstairs, she claimed she took a shower to calm herself and changed into fresh clothes, finishing just as Cruz returned home. However, investigators soon found discrepancies in Janice's story. She had said that she locked herself in her bedroom, as soon as the attack began, remaining hidden the entire time. Yet, when police examined her room, it appeared ransacked just like the rest of the house. This detail raised a critical question. If Janice had locked herself in the room and stayed there, how could it have been disturbed in such a way? Moreover, Janice's account of the timeline placed Lewis as the first victim, but forensic evidence directly contradicted this. The injuries and condition of the bodies indicated that Gwen was likely the first to be attacked, not Lewis. These inconsistencies prompted investigators to take a closer look at Janice's statements and behavior. Her story seemed to shift under scrutiny, with new details emerging that complicated the timeline. Investigators also decided to re-interview those closest to Janice, including her adopted father, Cruz. As they dug deeper, it became evident that Janice's version of events had evolved over time, further deepening suspicions and leaving the authorities with more questions than answers. Initially, Janice told investigators that her phone had been turned off during the attack, which explained why she hadn't responded to calls or messages. However, Cruz later contradicted this statement, recalling that he had called her phone during the chaos, and Cruz's alibi placed him at another location during the time of the murders. But the circumstances of the locked door left lingering doubts. Investigators considered whether it was possible for someone inside the house, someone who had been trusted or overlooked, to be responsible for the crimes. If the attacker was someone the victims knew, it would explain why the crime scene didn't show the usual signs of a break-in or initial struggle at the entrance. The possibility that the crime was committed by someone close to the family deepened the tragedy and added layers of complexity to the case. As the investigation unfolded, the inconsistencies in Janice's statements, her knowledge of the murder weapons, and the delivery driver's testimony painted a troubling picture. The lack of forced entry and the intimate familiarity with the family's belongings suggested that whoever committed the murders had been in the house or had direct access to it. Investigators continued to scrutinize the accounts of everyone involved, determined to uncover the truth and bring justice to the grieving family. Lavella, who had been away on a business trip at the time of the murders, returned home to a nightmare that would forever haunt her. Her absence ruled her out as a suspect, but the same could not be said for Janice, whose conflicting statements and presence at the crime scene raised troubling questions. However, the investigation faced a significant hurdle. Janice was a minor, only 17 years old. Under Philippine law, arresting a juvenile without undeniable evidence was legally difficult and ethically sensitive. This limitation forced investigators to tread carefully, even as suspicions continued to mount. Rather than taking Janice into custody immediately, the authorities decided to place her under the care of the Social Welfare Department for her protection and to ensure her legal rights were upheld. Investigators understood that if Janice's claims of multiple attackers were true, the case was far from straightforward. They would need to identify these alleged accomplices and determine their roles in the heinous crime. The focus of the investigation shifted toward uncovering whether Janice was an innocent bystander or an active participant. A breakthrough came on December 15th when forensic analysis revealed Janice's fingerprints on some of the murder weapons. This discovery, while alarming, was not definitive proof of guilt. Given that Janice lived in the house, on December 16th, 2021, Janice made a shocking confession to her lawyer, admitting her role in the brutal murders of Gwen and Lewis. She implicated her 21-year-old boyfriend and accomplice, Esmeraldo Caneldo Jr., as a co-conspirator. According to Janice, her actions stemmed from years of pent-up resentment and jealousy. She harbored deep bitterness toward Gwen and Lewis, believing they were favored by their parents in ways that left her feeling neglected and unimportant. Her time in the orphanage, where emotional support and stability were scarce, had only magnified her longing for love and acceptance. Janice admitted that she saw Gwen and Lewis as obstacles to becoming the center of her adoptive family's affection. In her mind, removing them would leave her as the sole recipient of her parents' attention, finally fulfilling her yearning for a secure and loving home. Her motive was rooted in a twisted desire to claim a place in the family that she felt was unfairly out of reach. This confession shed light on the complex emotions driving the crime, offering a glimpse into the psychological turmoil that had culminated in such horrific violence. 2 days later, on December 18th, Janice formally confessed her involvement to the police. Although inconsistencies remained in her story, her accounts shifted. but her role in orchestrating the murders was undeniable. With this evidence in hand, the police were able to locate and arrest Esmeraldo, who surrendered without resistance. He, too, confessed his part in the crime, confirming Janice's narrative. Forensic analysis later matched the blood found on the discarded clothing in the ditch to Esmeraldo, solidifying his connection to the murders. Esmeraldo, like Janice, was a minor at the time of the crime, which complicated the legal proceedings. As per Philippine law, he was placed under the supervision of the Social Welfare Department rather than being detained in a traditional prison. This arrangement ensured that both suspects' rights as minors were respected, even as the severity of their crimes was fully acknowledged. The legal protections afforded to juveniles created challenges for law enforcement, who were under immense public pressure to deliver justice swiftly. On the same day as Esmeraldo's arrest, an unrelated drug raid led to the apprehension of another 17-year-old boy. During the operation, officers discovered a severely damaged cell phone, later identified as belonging to Gwen. The phone's serial number confirmed it had been stolen after the murders. Investigators traced the device back to Esmeraldo, who had tried to sell it at Janice's request. Janice had been unable to dispose of the phone herself due to the growing scrutiny she faced and had enlisted Esmeraldo to handle the task. The boy found in possession of the phone was cleared of any involvement in the murders. It became evident that he had merely purchased the device without knowledge of its origins. Unfortunately, the water damage in the aftermath, Lavella, the siblings' adoptive mother, was interviewed by both the media and law enforcement. She expressed profound shock at Janice's role in the murders, but also reflected on early warning signs that, in hindsight, might have indicated trouble. Lavella recounted how the family first encountered Janice in 2020 when she worked as a housekeeper for one of Lavella's friends. Gwen and Lavella frequently visited this friend, and Gwen, being close in age to Janice, quickly developed a bond with her. Janice often sought Gwen's help with her studies, and Gwen, known for her generosity, happily supported her. Over time, Janice began to share more about her difficult upbringing. She described a childhood marked by poverty and a challenging life in an orphanage following the death of her parents. She also confided in Gwen about the pressures of balancing her studies with her demanding job as a housekeeper. Despite these hardships, Janice shared her dreams of attending university, but expressed fear about losing government support once she turned 18. Touched by her story, Gwen urged her parents to adopt Janice, hoping to give her a chance at a better life. Initially, Cruz and Lavella were hesitant about the adoption. However, Gwen's persistence and heartfelt appeals convinced them to move forward. In July 2021, just 5 months before the crime, Janice officially became part of the Maguad family. At first, the transition seemed to go smoothly. The family embraced Janice wholeheartedly, and she appeared to reciprocate their kindness and affection. However, as the months passed, subtle but concerning incidents began to emerge, hinting at underlying issues. One such incident occurred in August 2021 when Lavella's parents were hospitalized due to severe COVID-19 complications. Cruz recalled setting aside 10,000 pesos in the house as an emergency fund to cover unexpected medical expenses. However, during a critical moment, they discovered that the money had mysteriously disappeared. While they didn't suspect Janice at the time, in hindsight, this incident added to the growing list of behaviors that seemed unusual. These early warning signs, though subtle, painted a picture of underlying tensions that the family had overlooked in their efforts to provide Janice with a loving home. When Cruz went to check on the emergency fund, he discovered that the money had mysteriously disappeared. Janice claimed that thieves had stolen the cash. However, the next day, a significant amount of money was found hidden in Janice's school bag. After being questioned, Janice admitted to taking the money. Although this breach of trust was concerning, the family chose to forgive her. Gwen, in particular, was adamant that Janice should be given another chance, believing that her troubled past had influenced her actions. The family, feeling sympathy for her difficult childhood, attributed the theft to survival instincts that Janice had developed while growing up in harsh conditions. Janice apologized, and the family accepted her apology, hopeful that this would mark the end of her misdeeds. However, in the months leading up to the tragic murders, Janice's behavior began to shift. She had once been known for her strong work ethic, a trait that had been a significant factor in her adoption. But now, she appeared increasingly indifferent and irresponsible. She neglected her household chores, and when reminded, she would apologize but fail. Unfortunately, the siblings were soon separated, each placed in different orphanages where they lived for a period of time. By the time Janice was adopted in 2020, she had already reconnected with her biological family. But the reunion didn't last long. The relationship between Janice and her family soured quickly, and her biological relatives later accused her of cutting ties with them. They claimed that Janice had dismissed them, saying they were too poor to be of any use to her now that she was in a better position with her adoptive family. In an unexpected and heartbreaking twist, Janice's biological mother attended the funeral of Gwen and Lewis. She was overcome with grief and broke down in tears, apologizing repeatedly for what had happened. She expressed a deep sense of guilt and sorrow for the tragedy that had unfolded. Cruz and Lavella, while struggling with their own immense grief, saw the pain in Janice's mother and encouraged her to speak with Janice. They urged her to admit her wrongdoing and confess the truth if she truly felt remorseful for what had transpired. Janice's mother tried to meet with her at the social welfare department, as suggested by Cruz and Lavella. However, Janice refused to meet with her biological mother. Authorities, following protocol, asked Janice's mother to leave when she was unable to provide sufficient proof of her identity as Janice's biological parent. Despite this setback, the investigation continued to reveal more unsettling details about Janice's actions leading up to the murders. Among the shocking evidence that surfaced were screenshots of a conversation between Janice and an unidentified individual. The conversation went viral, revealing Janice's own words in which she confessed to her desire to kill her siblings. She spoke of how she believed that committing the murders would grant her the freedom she so desperately wanted. Janice even questioned whether anyone would still accept her after she killed them, but she expressed the belief that no matter the sin, God would forgive her if she sincerely asked for it. This chilling admission added a new layer to the investigation, showing that Janice had not only planned the murders, but had been struggling with deep emotional turmoil leading up to the crime. There were some reports suggesting that Janice had often talked about the 2009 horror film Orphan. The movie's plot, which involves a young girl adopted by a family who eventually betrays and murders them, seemed oddly similar to Janice's own actions. However, these claims were mostly speculative, and it was hard to tell whether Janice had ever actually been influenced by the film. Many believe this connection was drawn only later to add a dramatic twist to the story, but it still raised uncomfortable questions about Janice's state of mind before the murders. As Janice's trial finally began, she shocked those present with her behavior. Instead of showing any signs of remorse or sadness, Janice was seen smiling and even laughing, especially when her adoptive parents, Cruz and Lavella, were in the room. It was clear to everyone watching that she showed no regret for the lives she had taken. Cruz and Lavella later spoke out in interviews, revealing that despite the pain they felt, they would have been willing to forgive Janice if she had only shown even a small amount of genuine sorrow. Unfortunately, she remained cold and unsympathetic, making their grief even harder to bear. From March 2022, when both Janice and Esmeralda were officially charged with the murders, until May 17, 2022, when the verdict was delivered, the case captivated the public's attention in the Philippines. The trial was widely followed, with many people eagerly awaiting the outcome. In the end, Janice was sentenced to 31 years in prison, while Esmeralda was given a 29-year sentence. However, both of them were required to serve their sentences under the supervision of the Department of Social Welfare and Development until they turned 21. After that age, they would be moved to adult prisons to continue their sentences. Cruz and Lavella, despite their sorrow, had mixed feelings about the verdicts. While they recognized that the courts had delivered the most severe punishment allowed under the law, they still felt that the sentences were too lenient. What hurt them the most, however, was Janice's utter lack of remorse. They believed that the justice system had failed to hold her fully accountable for the brutal crimes she had committed, particularly because she showed no real regret for what she had done. One of the biggest issues that the parents had was with the existing laws around minors and criminal liability in the Philippines. Cruz and Lavella were particularly vocal in their opposition to Republic Act 9344, which limits how minors can be held legally accountable for serious crimes. According to this law, children as young as 15 can be held responsible for their actions, but instead of being tried as adults, they are sent to youth centers or rehabilitation programs. The law prevents minors like Janice from facing adult prison sentences, no matter how severe the crime. This law was a source of great frustration for Gwen and Lewis's parents. They argued that even though Janice was only 17 at the time of the murders, it should not have meant she could escape full accountability for her actions. If the crime had taken place in the United States or many other countries, they would have been tried as adults due to the brutality of their actions. Cruz and Lavella felt that Janice's age shouldn't protect her from facing the full consequences of her crime, especially considering the violent and premeditated nature of the murders. They believed that no matter how young she was, she should have been held accountable for the lives she took. Many people shared Cruz and Lavella's frustration with the law, believing it was far too lenient. Especially in cases like this, they have spoken out publicly, saying they think the law should be changed to ensure that those who commit violent crimes, even at a young age, are held fully responsible for their actions. They felt that the justice system, by focusing more on rehabilitation than punishment, had failed to deliver justice for their family, and they are determined to make their voices heard to prevent this from happening to others. During the investigation, more details came to light about the kind of person Lewis was. It was revealed that Lewis had gone out of his way to make Janice feel welcome and loved. He even gave up his own room for her and slept on the living room couch to make her feel more at home. Despite his kindness and efforts to include her, he still became a victim of the violence that Janice and Esmeraldo carried out. The Maguad family had done everything they could to make Janice feel part of their family, and to betray that love in such a way felt like the ultimate act of cruelty. In the wake of the crime, Cruz and Lavella have refused to meet with Janice. Cruz has even said that he couldn't trust himself to stay calm if he ever saw her again after what she did to his family. It's easy to understand why he feels this way. The pain and betrayal they have experienced are beyond what most people could imagine, and for them, seeing Janice would likely reopen wounds that may never fully heal.